Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and its tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed Navy videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that the government has admitted that UFOs are real,
Or at least that the videos were authentic.
it raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
Right? They may still be unlikely, but there's so many explanations for these stories. Even if the truth is more mundane than you're hoping, if any of it turns out to be true, whew,
Woo! It's a very exciting time. All right, everybody. This is going to be sort of a mini episode, odd episode. I'm not really sure how to describe it. Long story short, Chuck's out sick. He just got back from Thanksgiving, and he and his wife are down with a horrible flu. So I am going to do a quick episode today, just with some recommendations for you all. If you're enjoying the podcast, I think it's likely that you will enjoy some or all of the books, TV series, documentaries, and podcasts I'm about to recommend. All the links will be in the show notes as well. Before I dive into it, one other note. We're trying to keep to a regular release cadence with an episode dropping every couple of weeks. Uh, there will be another episode after this one in about 2 weeks, and then we're going to take a few weeks off for the holidays. So after the next episode, there'll be a gap, and you'll see us again in the new year, early in January. Okay, so, up first, I've got a small list of books here. I should note as I go into this, by the way, these are the kind of books that I would recommend to Chuck. In fact, the plan was I was going to be recommending these to Chuck. So these are aimed at people who are interested in the topic but aren't necessarily true believers. So up first, my highest recommendation, if you're only going to get one book on this list, pick up In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science by Ross Coulthart. This came out in 2021, just before the UAP report dropped, actually. And it is a great summary of kind of the current state of the UFO field. It kind of covers the history of how things came up. It touches a little bit on the Admiral Wilson notes, some other controversial things, and just kind of hits all the things that I've talked about so far, with the why things feel different since 2016. Um, Ross Coulthart, in particular, is worth following. He is an Australian investigative journalist. I've been following him for a while. He's a really funny guy. He has a very particular personality, and he's told the story a few times that the reason he got interested in doing reports on UFOs was basically because everyone told him not to. Like, he would come to his boss and ask about a UFO story, and his boss would say, "Oh, we don't do that." So he's kind of a stubborn fella, and he dove into this, and he said, "I came into this fully convinced that I was going to debunk this. It would be a brief thing, and I'd figure out there was nothing to it." And long story short, he came away not necessarily convinced that we're being met by an extraterrestrial civilization, but convinced that there is something happening that is worth investigating. And broadly speaking, he feels kind of frustrated that his peers in the investigative journalism community aren't taking the topic seriously. The second book I'd like to recommend is a little bit older. Came out in 2010. It's called UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. This is written by Leslie Kane. You might recognize that name. She was one of the reporters on the 2016 New York Times article that we've talked about before. She's been in the UFO field for a while. That's part of why uh, Lou Elizondo approached her when he left ATEP and that story happened, is because she had written this book and she had a good reputation. She's also an investigative journalist. She has a kind of no nonsense approach to it. And her book is almost exclusively finding highly credible witnesses, so military pilots, government officials, people who we trust with our secrets, people who we trust to make decisions for the rest of us. And they all come forward with very compelling stories. So very nuts and bolts, high quality witnesses, also worth your time. The next two books are sort of a bonus if you're getting into it. First one is called The Believer: Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. This came out in 2021. It's written by Ralph Blumenthal, who is the other reporter on the 2016 New York Times article. This book is not explicitly about UFOs. It's more like a biography of Harvard psychiatrist John Mack. Uh, I don't want to spoil the whole book, but in a nutshell, John Mack built up a career as a brilliant psychiatrist. He was running a department at Harvard, very well regarded, very well respected. And all of a sudden, his career took a hard left turn, and he risked his career to study alien abductees and experiencers, and very nearly got kicked out of Harvard as a result of it. The book is fascinating and worth taking a look at for how someone coming from more of the hard science side ends up convinced that there's something to this. And last of all, if you enjoyed our episode on Tom DeLonge and how all of our recent developments in the UFO field can be traced back to the lead singer of freaking Blink 182. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend it. It's one of my favorites. Uh, then you may be interested in reading Secret Machines: Chasing Shadows. Now, if you go looking for secret machines, you're going to get a little confused. There are two book series called Secret Machines. One is a three-book fiction trilogy, and one is a three-book non-fiction trilogy. I am recommending the first book in the fiction trilogy. Um, Tom has gone on record saying that while the book is fictional, it is heavily based on the information he has received from government and military insiders. Uh, how much you want to believe that is up to you. But if nothing else, it is a fascinating read to kind of get an inside view into what Tom thinks is happening in the UFO field. I do not recommend the nonfiction series. I read the first book in that, and it is the most dry, boring, college lecture-y kind of book I've ever read. Thoroughly do not recommend. But yeah, the first book in the fiction series, Chasing Shadows. It's a great read, real fun, and according to Tom, based on real events. All right. If you're more interested in TV series, I've got a few to recommend. First of all, uh, a History Channel series that started running in 2019 is called Unidentified: Inside America's UFO Investigation. Speaking of Tom DeLonge, this series was run by his company, To the Stars Academy, which is where Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon ended up after that 2016 article. The series is fascinating because mostly it follows Lou, and he's very clear, he's upfront about the fact that he ran the Pentagon UFO office, but he's also upfront about the fact that he has security oaths and can't talk about everything he knows. So he can talk about the stuff that is already public, but he can't say like, oh, while we were investigating stuff, I came across this case. So similar to Leslie Kane's book, he focuses on finding highly credible military witnesses who are willing to speak publicly about what's happened to them. So they go all over the place. They talk to Commander Fravor, who was involved in the Tic Tac incident. They talk to all of the pilots who were involved in those leaked Navy videos. They go all over the place. It's worth watching. Lou has a very level-headed approach to it. Some people have accused him of being a little alarmist about UFOs, but what he has always said is, uh, from the perspective of the national security apparatus, UFOs should be evaluated and considered as a threat. And he distinguishes between something being a threat and something being hostile. Something can be non-hostile, but still absolutely be a threat to you. It can be dangerous. And in this case, what we've got is aerial vehicles that we have no control over in our airspace, buzzing our pilots, harassing our nuclear facilities. We don't have any way to deal with them. That is, by definition, something that the military should be taking seriously and paying attention to. And that's kind of the extent of what he recommends. So I like Lou. I really enjoyed this series. I think it's worth your time. A little older than that, another History Channel series is called Hangar One, the UFO Files. You can find this on Netflix. Um, this is a little bit more breathless. This one, a little bit more credulous on the UFO topic. The premise of the series is that they are going over famous cases in the MUFON files. MUFON, if you haven't heard of them, is the Mutual UFO Network. It is a civilian group that was set up after Project Blue Book that is dedicated to collecting reports about UFO encounters. And they've done good and bad things over the years. They're kind of a mixed group, but they certainly have some interesting cases, and this series kind of explores some of them. Uh, More recently, J.J. Abrams produced a four-part Showtime series. It's just called UFO. Um, so it's only four episodes, but it's high production value, and it does a good job of kind of giving you a good summary of the current state of the UFO field. I didn't think it was amazing, but if you're kind of looking for a one-stop shop, J.J. Abrams knows how to film something good. It's pretty good, worth your time. Moving on to documentaries. The first one that I'd like to recommend is called The Phenomenon. It's by director James Fox. This came out in 2020. It is pretty well regarded in the UFO community as kind of a high level overview of what you need to know about UFOs. The criticisms I did see about it were basically like nothing new to see here. And if you are a lifelong UFO researcher, that may be the case. But if you're someone who's kind of dipping their toes in and looking to like see, what is this all about? It's a great kind of 2 hour summary of what's going on. Next one is The Aerial Phenomenon. This was directed by Randall Nickerson, just came out this year, 2022, and it covers a famous incident, which I actually haven't had a chance to talk to Chuck about yet, but the aerial school in rural Zimbabwe, this was back in the 80s, I believe. Uh, all of the kids were outside playing. They saw a UFO land. Some of the kids were psychically speaking to the alien. It's a really interesting case, mainly because there were so many witnesses. And if you don't know kids, it's really hard to get them all to tell a consistent story. And all these kids told a very consistent story. Uh, Referring back to John Mack, who I mentioned earlier, the Harvard psychiatrist, John Mack actually flew out to Africa to investigate this case, talk to all the kids. He took it very seriously. The documentary is great, does a really good job of summarizing what happened, and meets up with all of the kids who have now all grown up, and most of them are standing by their story and haven't changed any details over the years. Uh, these last two, these are more like if you want to dive into a particular character. So, first of all, there's Unacknowledged. This came out in 2017. It was directed by Michael Mazzola. This documentary is one of a series that Stephen Greer has produced. I've talked about Stephen Greer briefly. He is a very controversial figure. He has done a lot of good things in the field. He has also done some more sketchy things more recently. This is one of the older documentaries. It's kind of a good summary of what Stephen Greer believes, which in a nutshell is the government has been keeping this all secret from us, which is a crime against humanity. We could have free energy and climate change solutions, but they're guarding it all in a hangar and not letting anyone know. The second one, if you watched our Bob Lazar episode, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. This came out in 2018. It was directed by Jeremy Corbell. Um, Very fun to watch. It's a good ride. Whether you believe Lazar's story or not, this does a really good job of kind of introducing you to the man, who he is, how he feels about it, what's happened to him over the years. It is perhaps a bit overly credible to Bob, and weirdly, the director, Jeremy Corbell, is in the documentary. Like he kind of makes the story about himself. But if you're going in just for a little bit more info about Bob and having a good time, I think you'll enjoy it. And last of all, if you're enjoying this UFO podcast, it's possible you'd enjoy some others. So I've got a few recommendations here. First of all, easily my favorite UFO podcast on the market right now, The UFO Rabbit Hole by Kelly Chase. Kelly is a great speaker. She's very thoughtful. The tenor of her first few episodes are basically like, okay, listen, I went deep down the UFO rabbit hole. It has changed like everything I think about the world. I am a very like science-driven person. This was a major change for me, and I want to talk about why. I want to talk about why I believe this stuff because similar to how me and Chuck talk about it, like she's like, if any of this is true, this how could you think about anything else? Like this is all I can think about. So anyway, she's great. I cannot recommend her podcast highly enough. In fact, she actually just put out a book that is the essays that she wrote for the first 10 episodes of the podcast. The book is great. The podcast is great. Can't recommend her highly enough. Up next, Points of Convergence is a podcast by a guy named Exo Academian. I love this podcast. This guy gets real weird. He gets real philosophical. His stance in a nutshell is that the UFO phenomenon is not one thing, it is many things. Um, he doesn't believe that everything can be attributable to a single thing, like, oh, every UFO you see is aliens from Zeta Reticuli, or every UFO you see is a secret military program, or every UFO you see is some weird psychological phenomena. He believes it's all of the above and more. And he does a great job kind of covering the big theories in the field. He talks about, what's the difference between extraterrestrials and interdimensionals and ultra dimensionals and all sorts of stuff. It's a great podcast, lots of fun. There's a big backlog, so if you're looking to get weird with the topic, I can't recommend it enough. And last of all, I opened the podcast with Ross Coulthart. I'm going to close it with him as well. Ross has a podcast with his buddy Bryce Zabel. They're both investigative journalists, although Bryce Zabel has spent the last 20 years or so working in Hollywood. Um, they have a podcast called Need to Know, which is much more uh, journalistic, news oriented. So they put out a podcast on a regular cadence. I think it's every couple of weeks. And every time it comes out, they talk about like, okay, what's happened, what is going to happen. They're all in on the delay of the UFO report. They're great, and they're very camera friendly, radio friendly. So their show is a lot more highly produced than any of the others. Like me and Chuck are just recording this over Zoom. You can tell that Ross and Bryce are used to putting on their camera face and recording professionally. So if you're looking for a little bit of a higher quality production value, Need to Know is a good stop for you. All right, so that's the list of my recommendations. Like I said, all of these will be in the show notes, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with our final episode of the year, and then we'll take a holiday break, and we'll see you all in the new year. So, as always, I thank you all for listening to me talk about UFOs, so my wife doesn't have to.